Good evening. Welcome to Mi Gente on Air. I am your host, Larry Rodarte, and it is a beautiful Tuesday. It's raining outside. It's muggy, but I'd rather have that weather than the cold, right? And that's where we are today here in May, mid-May. And I've got a special guest tonight. It's Saginaw's very own. His name is Reyes. He goes by his stage name of Reyes, but his real name, as many of us knew him here, is Michael Reyes. And he's doing big things in Detroit. And so we want to talk about that tonight and get information about what Mike's doing, as well as talk about everything else that's happening in the community. So stay with me here. And if you got a question or a concern and you want to just put that in the chat room, be my guest, and we'll try to address it here on Mi Gente on Air.
Welcome to Mi Gente on Air on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online WSGW.com. Now, here is your host, Larry Rodarte.
Si me ves cantando, es que por dentro tú me estás matando.
Good evening. Welcome to Mi Gente on Air. Thank you for being with me here tonight. I am your host, Larry Rodarte. And we're going to talk with a son of Saginaw. He is with us here tonight in the promo. Many of you seen Michael Reyes. He's with We Are Culture Creators Detroit. And so he is a Saginaw son who has graduated from Arthur Hill High School in 1998, moved around the United States, and he's landed in Detroit. And we're so happy to have him here tonight because he's going to talk about what he's been up to. He's going to update us on his career as well as a new promotion that he has with Visit Detroit. So please help me welcome to the studio, Michael Reyes.
Hey, thank you for having me. Hey, I feel like I should have an audience.
Audience,
you know,
yeah.
It's cool. That would be a great addition, right?
Yeah, we're on the live stream here. So
it's cool.
You know, it's been a long time, Mike. I've known Michael since he was a teen. I think 16 years old.
Maybe like younger, maybe 14, honestly.
Yeah, actually a baby, because I remember when you were born, I was dating his aunt at the time.
So I told my friend on the way down here, I was like, how did that go? But anyway.
and here we are, how many years later, some 40 plus years. And Mike is doing some great things in Detroit, like I said. And before we get into that, though, Mike, I want my audience to hear who you are, who your parents are, what your background is, and what was your trajectory to get to Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long process, right? So, my stage name is Reyes Poetry. You can always find me online with that, my website or my Instagram. But my actual name is Michael Reyes. My mom's Martha Reyes, and my dad is also named Michael Reyes. But grew up in Saginaw, and like a lot of people wanted to find some opportunity, but as a part of that road to trying to find my path, and after moving to Chicago, New York, and ending up back in Detroit, the foundation of a lot of my work and most of my trajectory really was in Saginaw. So growing up in the 90s, it was a different era, and I think one of the things for me is that knowing that sports wasn't going to be an option. Like a lot of kids, I wanted to play basketball, but right away, 6th, 7th grade, when you had friends that were dunking in 7th grade, you kind of knew like, okay, maybe this is not an option for me. And being self-aware, I wanted to get into art, and I started to, dabble in theater, write some poetry, really big influence in hip hop music. And then, as I started to look for my culture and try to connect and identify some of my work, I landed in North Middle School in 8th grade, and met Dr. Salazar, who I had for 3 classes. And Dr. Salazar was really into the Chicano movement, revolutionary movements, political movements. And I had him for criminal justice. I had him for Spanish class, and I had him for basically my homeroom. So half the day I was with him for a year, and he gave me a lot of information. And we had a club there that was like a Latino club. And, we wanted to organize our first Cinco de Mayo celebration at North Middle School. And he gave us some support. And then as that went on, I went to high school at Arthur Hill. And part of that, we had a club there called the Latino Action Club. And that was really cool because it was like, our kind of Latino community at Arthur Hill. But then as time kind of went on through my high school experience, we started connecting with other groups that were outside of Arthur Hill that were doing like Latino activations at their school at Bridgeport or Carleton, or even some students from Saginaw High, and Nouvelle Central. I think it's Nouvelle Central or Nouvelle. And basically we started talking to all these students that kept bringing up these names of Mika and Val. And I had started to work with Mi Gente. And so it was kind of like around that same time where I'm around Mi Gente, kind of like learning the newspaper business, learning advertisement, learning how to do a deck to kind of like create funds. And really for me, I wanted to shoot photos and video. And so around this time, you, Larry, right, helped us facilitate this conversation about Club Diferencia, which was basically a citywide Latino club. At that time, I had no idea what a nonprofit was, what a grant was, what funding was. And I think the beauty of that organization, which just basically took all the clubs that were Latino clubs from all these high schools, put us all together in a very informal but still structured space. And we started this concept of doing like a video show, some television, some conversations, contributing to Mi Gente, the newspaper, but also starting this club called La Diferencia. And as a part of that, we shot like a video show, and we did like, Latino Mexican history, specifically Mexican history, culture, and played videos, kind of coalescing with some of the stuff that was happening at Mi Gente around the music, around dances. And I think, your newspaper that you printed around Selena, I think was one of the catalysts for a lot of our generation to come together and start to think about, well, what does it mean to be a Mexican or Chicano or Latino, however you identify, in Saginaw at that time. And, seeing someone go from, I think like for me, I grew up on La Bamba, right? That was one of the movies, and I wanted to be like Richie Valens, and, just seeing those cultural iconic figures in those films. And then fast forward, we have Selena, who they dedicated a movie to, after her passing. And I feel like all of that energy at the same time was affecting our work around Mi Gente magazine, around La Diferencia. And so all of that blueprint. And at the same time, being at Arthur Hill, I spent half the day. I think it was like, I can't remember the actual name, but basically it's like a technical school, right? You'd go to half the day. I would be learning video editing and audio editing. And so all of that time frame was building up. So when I did graduate from Arthur Hill, I had all these skills and all this experience traveling to Texas, shooting video shows, editing video, editing sound, using, Photoshop and PageMaker and all these old kind of apps to be able to help produce the newspaper. I didn't go to college. I was kind of like, floating around. And so I ended up in Phoenix for a year, but then I found my way eventually to Chicago. And I spent 13 years there as an artist, a creative, a poet, and worked at a pretty established nonprofit called the Juan Antonio Correger Puerto Rican Cultural Center, worked really closely with Puerto Ricans. But that's what established my poetry career. And then from that point forward, poetry really was a catalyst for me to do everything in art. And that's ranging from, founding my own nonprofit in Detroit, to touring, to being in films and movies and plays. Poetry has always been the root of that conversation, but also rooted from Saginaw, then later, Chicago, New York, and then now being in Detroit for almost 12 years, and being back home. I always wanted to be home, didn't know how to contribute home. But when I ended up in Detroit, it's been a really good transitional period for me. At the same time, Detroit is in this kind of like, I won't call it Renaissance because I don't think that's the right word, because people have always been, I feel like Renaissance is like, oh, it's new. It's not. It's just that foundational Detroit work is now blossoming into this new generation of creatives coming out of Detroit culturally. Because, we have Motown, technos from Detroit, punk music. A lot of those rhythms are founded in Detroit. And now 2025, there's this whole movement of art that Detroit is producing at a high level. And people all over the world are looking at Detroit as an option to create culture, to produce, to connect to what foundationally is there. It's a city that's 80% Black. So our proximity to Black culture is really heavy. I live in Southwest Detroit, which is predominantly a Latino neighborhood, but also has some Arab folks, some Black folks, sprinkled in some areas. And so I think that energy of Detroit right now in 2025 as a creative is a perfect embodiment for our nonprofit called We Are Culture Creators, and some of the work we're doing with MTV and Lululemon, and the cultural work we're doing around a project that we have with them, as well as this new role I have with Visit Detroit.
Let me ask you a question real quick,
Mhm.
and because I seen your trajectory through the years, and I remember when you went to Chicago from Phoenix,
Mhm.
and you really established yourself. You started a nonprofit there. I forget what was it called,
Bate
but
Urbano.
yes,
Yep.
yes, and then all of a sudden you came home to the state of Michigan, to Detroit. I was really surprised. But what drew you from Chicago and the life that you had there to Detroit?
Yeah, I think like as you develop as a creative, you have different lives, right? So I've had 4 lives in a sense. Maybe this is going into my 5th kind of like arc as a creative. There was nothing really that Chicago did or like it was a bad experience. It was more so maturing. I wanted to lead my own vision. And in Chicago, it was a very established organization. It was 40 years established. And so there, I felt like I had hit a ceiling with what I could really offer. I had my own ideas and my own vision for how I felt work could be done, but I was also a little bit burnt out of doing nonprofit work. So when I left, I ended up meeting a woman when I was speaking at Jackson State Prison. She was there speaking as well with an organization that she had established. And so when I met her, falling in love, and Detroit became an option, right? Because she was from Detroit. After we break up, we had all this work that we had built for almost 4 years, and we just kept kind of working, even though the relationship didn't work, the partnership worked. And so I think Detroit became something viable once I spent time there and understood the opportunity to be able to contribute to the culture that was already being created and was created. So when you think of somebody like, by the time I moved to Detroit, I was like 33. Chicago, there was no opportunity to be able to purchase a home. That was one big factor, is that I could purchase a home and live. I had purchased a home in Saginaw, but to be able to do the work that I wanted to do in Saginaw would have been challenging. I don't think I couldn't do it, but to be on like that national level, I wanted to be in a bigger city like a lot of people. And so I think Detroit became an option once I met a dynamic group of young folks, and not wanting to start a nonprofit. Sometimes, the universe, God, whatever you may want to call it, will lead you into what you're best at. And had established a really successful org. And so it was kind of natural after some management stuff didn't work out with some artists. Basically, we had all these young people around, and we're like, all right, well, let's create like a platform called We Are Culture Creators. And we started shooting videos and producing and creating opportunity for young folks. And then somebody nudged me and was like, hey, well, that there's funding for that type of work. You should probably apply for a few grants. And so for the first 4-5 years, we didn't apply for anything. I didn't even understand like kind of the process. And so we applied for a grant from My Brother's Keeper with the Skillman Foundation, and we actually won. And that started opening up a conversation about creating a nonprofit. So, as a 501c3, which is the legal status, we're still pretty new. We're right around maybe 5 or 6 years. But as a nonprofit organization, we've been around for about 12 years. The legal status just gives you the non-taxable status, which we kind of got in the last 6 years.
And so when you started
Culture Creators.
Mm-hmm. I got my C's messed up. Is that what has really been your forte in terms of like being involved with the young people? Because I know that's part of what this is, bringing out that talent from the young people of Detroit, which is a whole different vibe from kind of what we were doing with the Tejano scene here in Saginaw. So it's definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's like some cross patterns. So one is that we're in a city that's 80% Black, right? So when we're servicing young folks, it's a very open culturally. A lot of Latinos rap, they perform. And so we don't service just Latino folks. So we're not necessarily like a Latino org. But what happens is we partner with other orgs. And so there's a group called Fiesta Vibes Detroit. And Fiesta Vibes Detroit is run by my business partner, EJ. And when we met, our synergy was to create an opportunity for young Latino artists and creatives to have an opportunity to DJ at venues that a lot of times aren't considered like Latin venues. As We Are Culture Creators was created with Elizabeth Stone and myself, that was more focused on access and equity for artists of color, more on a broad scale. So a lot of our young people, are Latino and Black. And when I say Latino, it's not just Mexican. We have a few Dominicans, Puerto Ricans. And in that project specifically, we just try to open up opportunities for mentorship. What happens is the control of the city, even though we're 80% Black, a lot of the downtown is still very much controlled by corporate dollars, folks that are not maybe from Detroit that are controlling the venue, and also white folks, right? And so there's still a conversation that can be had about equity. And so what we try to do is help young people with a pad, in a sense of like a cheat code, in the sense that we can make a call as an established organization, vouch for that young person, connect them to a mentorship opportunity, open a door, get them on an event, get them on a festival, get them on a tour, take them across the world. We've done 5 exchanges where we've gone to Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, with young people from Detroit, and then bringing German young artists to Detroit as an exchange. So I think that part of our work is we didn't want to focus on maybe teaching a young person how to make a beat or rap. Our focus was, if you already are doing that at a high level, how can we help you elevate that in the city? And really the overarching goal is so that a young person in Detroit doesn't have to go to LA or New York to be successful, that you can be successful in Detroit. You can buy a home in Detroit from art, right? You can create a space. If you want to raise a family, you have an option to do that. If you just want to live and be an artist, you have an option to do that. And so our main ethos is helping young folks understand and navigate music, art, and culture, on the business side and the professional side, while on the humanity side is still allowing a space for like this third place that a lot of people are talking about, for community. So our doors are open 24/7. It's just a house in the neighborhood, has a small studio, video equipment. We have editing equipment. But our real push nowadays is that we create active opportunities in the commercial space for young people to be able to connect and activate. And so, we have partnerships with the Detroit Pistons. We have partnerships with Herradura Tequila. We have partnerships with Jack Daniels. We just recently started with Olympia Entertainment. And I think part of our work is to help kind of create a space for those young artists to flourish. And so We Are Culture Creators has done that. Now, on the Latino side of things, with our Fiesta House series, what was happening is you had your traditional clubs, which is popping bottles, and the downtown club scene, which did have a few Latino spaces. And then you had your community stuff, which was more focused deeper in the neighborhood, very regional, heavy Spanish speaking, very immigrant focused, which was really, really good spaces as well. And so we found a need that we were going to events in the city that were non-Latino, but there'd be a bunch of Latinos there looking at each other like, oh, this is really cool. And so we found an opportunity to create a space that is Latinx, Latine, Latino focused, Latina focused, and creates a space for us to have DJ events, music events, house. Like, we really call it like a Latin house series. So it's like basically global Latin music is how we categorize it. So it's everything from traditional stuff you grew up with, to regional Mexican, to reggaeton, to more Puerto Rican, Dominican focused, dembow, to house music mixed in, to even techno, ghetto tech, rap, hip hop, everything mixed together for a night that we can come together, because our palettes are so different, right? Like, if you're somebody that's like Chicano, Mexicano in Detroit, especially if you're into music, you're going to end up at some of these major venues. And so we just wanted to open that door to be able to have our DJs that we represent and work with have the opportunity to DJs in those spaces. And I do believe we changed the culture and contributed to the culture of the city in this next generation, because we are able to create our own paths. And it's not just like, Tejano music or Mexican regional music. It really is, with young people having access to the internet, it's a global scene. So when you listen to Bad Bunny's last album, where he was able to take all his traditional forms of Puerto Rican music and re-rock it in a way that's modern, a lot of young people across Latin America are doing that in their own regional and local ways, and then giving it back to our community. So like even corrido bands, right? There's like 6 young corrido bands in Detroit that you probably, if you're not in Detroit, really wouldn't even know exist. And don't even talk about like Chicago, because I do get to Chicago from time to time. There's a whole host of young corrido bands. And corrido was almost a dying art at one point. And now it has this resurgence with young people and creatives, and they're adding their own flavor, their own sound, their own interpretation of that traditional music. And so when I think of like music in Detroit, especially the proximity to like Mexican and Chicano and Latino culture, there definitely is, for us, we double down on Detroit culture. So for us, techno music is something we want to include within the creative process of like Latino culture, right? A Black music that's in our city, we want to be able to add to that, connect with it. That's our foundation because it's Detroit music. We don't necessarily want to replicate like a night or sound that isn't necessarily from Detroit. We add to it, but then we add our cultural elements, our vibe on it, whether it's like ghetto tech, techno, house. And that's been our sweet spot in a sense, is that we're a part of that global movement of Latin music. Like we have an artist, Rosa Pistola, coming from Mexico City in a week, and she's going to be our featured DJ, right? So we're booking artists from Mexico. We have 2 Mexican DJs coming this summer. We have a collective from Chicago that's Arab focused, that's doing a Latin Arab fusion, right? And that's kind of this new conversation that we want to create, is opening up those pathways for cross-cultural creation in a, not in a corny, like, quota type of way, but it's like authentically people that we work with, that we build with, that we talk to, that we're engaged with. Recently we were just in Mexico City, and basically we're there almost for a month. We broke up the trip into 2 trips. We were there with Heredura Tequila. They had brought us to Guadalajara, but I think for me, my great grandfather is buried in Mexico City. Literally, he's buried in the cemetery there, right? And my great grandmother is buried here in the Thumb, up near Reese, Michigan, Cairo, Akron. There's a small cemetery near Reese. And I think about that disparity of my great grandfather being buried in Mexico City, my great grandmother being buried here. She was basically his maid, and he had a kid with her, and all that history of 120 plus years. So when I go to Mexico, I'm posting videos and people are like, where are you? I'm like, yo, I'm in Mexico City. But our vision as Mexicans from here are like the countryside, because a lot of our people came from like rural areas. And so like we're on the rancho, that's what we're seeing in our brain. But when you go to Guadalajara, when you go to Monterrey, when you go to Mexico City, it's a modern city that's 3 times, like Mexico City's 3 times bigger than New York. So they have everything.
Well, you know what? Let's take a break real quick, and we're going to come back to that conversation because I want to know what you actually did in Guadalajara. So we'll be back here with Michael Reyes on Mi Gente on Air. All right. So thanks everybody for coming into the room. He's got a lot to talk about, right? And I want to just read some of the comments real quick because there's a few people leaving. Sonny Castellon says, need to get El Dusty from Corpus or Mexican with Guns from SA, San Antonio, dope DJs. Angela Blanco says, it's been a pure joy watching all of your moves. Amazing work. Love seeing all of our class of 98, 99 giving back to our youth and cities. Keep crediting and lifting. Love you big always. And you can respond.
No, I'm just listening. I'm like, oh, that's great. I want to cry.
Yeah. And Val Blanco says, like I always tell you, keep doing you, Reyes. The world is all yours. The world is an oyster. We've got somebody from Alma, Latina Western Michigan University. Saludos. Daniel Oro. How do you say it? Do you know him?
Yeah, I know Daniel. Yeah. Super dope person.
Yeah, he's got a show over there as well.
I think it was a while ago, but yeah, I know Daniel. Super dope person.
Yeah. Also, Gloria Lumstead says she's watching too. So you got some people on here that know you and know the history. And it's really nice to see, like Angela Blanco says, that class of 98, 99. So many of you that we have seen that are, giving back in a way involved with their community. And
But I think it has to do with also having those opportunities to have mentors, right? Like that's a big piece of like having that facilitation for that. Like, there's not a it's not happenstance that grouping of those 2 years, or even let's say a little bit after and a little bit before, is because there was people like Val, like Mika, like you, and all the other folks that were doing work at the local high schools that were allowing these spaces. And I think that mentorship, like it's the same thing if I go to Chicago, there's a whole generation of young people that are working for NBC and ABC and all these companies, but they had access to mentorship, technology, ideas. They got to travel a little bit. So I think that is also credited to y'all as mentors, right? It's not just that one class, because when that mentorship opportunity is there, you see the growth of those folks that came from that year, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a credit to La Diferencia and Canta Conmigo. And
you know what? We have old footage of you guys dancing in the beginning. You remember the beginning segment? Yeah. And you guys were dancing. I think we were even at
I'll
one
say
point
I
in
was
Texas.
loosely dancing.
You were kind of standing there trying to move, a little stiff, but and Andrew Cardenas was in there.
Yeah,
and there was a whole bunch of you, but I'm gonna have to show that.
I mean, you should post it and tag me so I could be embarrassed.
Yeah, that's a little like 25 years ago already. Yeah. Can you believe that? So, well, we're gonna go back into the show here and talk more with Reyes. So stay with us. No te vayas.
This is Gente on Air on WSGW.
Welcome back, mi gente. Thank you for being with me here tonight. We're talking with Michael Reyes, a Saginaw-born who is living his best life in the Detroit market, and we're talking about culture and heritage and all those things in between. And when we left the show, he was talking about his trip to Guadalajara, Mexico, and about his ancestors, his great-grandfather being buried in Mexico, and all the in-betweens from 120 years there, and knowing that his great-grandmother was buried near Reese and Clio. So it's like, what were you trying to say with that there? Because it's obviously something that you've thought about.
I mean, I think as like a creative, right? So we were in Guadalajara with Herradura tequila, right? So I brought you a bottle of Herradura tequila.
Right.
Yeah,
now we're talking.
No, this is yours. All right. So this is the new Blanco, right? That's just released. But Herradura sponsors some of our cultural work, right? And so part of our trip there was to go to the hacienda and learn about the process of tequila. And so we went there with like 27 other storytellers. I call myself a storyteller, but let's say influencers for lack of a better word. And we were able to visit for 2 days in Guadalajara, but we had already set up some DJ events prior. So we were out there a little earlier. So the Herradura trip really was about understanding the process of tequila, understanding the process of that hacienda, and learning what the history of tequila, right? And actually going to the distillery and seeing the process, seeing their old process. And so after that trip, we took a trip to Mexico City. And in Mexico City, we've done work there before. We went to, we worked with a few producers out there and a few artists. Boca Floja is one of them, who's a pretty established rapper. But when I was talking about my great-grandfather being literally buried in the French cemetery there in Mexico City, and then my great-grandmother being here in Michigan, is that there's all this space, and we have these narratives in our head of what Mexico is. And I think one thing to say, I was sitting in a cafe in Culiacan, Mexico, which is a small municipality in Mexico City, and I'm working at a cafe, and I'm there for like 8 hours because I'm doing my regular work day. And I'm watching, right, this young college group come in and they start playing games. They're smiling and they rented one of the rooms. I watched a woman, she was working all day. I saw her do calls on Zoom. I watched somebody work on a business plan because I was kind of like overlooking their computer and they had their business plan out. And this is all in a matter of a day. And I seen all this joy and I seen all this, like, just the ability to exist. And I started to think about, is there something as a Chicano can I contribute, right? And Mexico City is experiencing a heavy push of gentrification as well, right? Like the housing is going up. A lot of Americans live there. A lot of Europeans live there because of the lifestyle and how affordable it is. And so there's a lot of these layers of contradiction. Artists are moving there. But knowing my great grandfather was buried there, I just had this feeling of wanting to contribute in some way. And as an artist, that's, I think, what I'm going through now is just figuring out there's something I can offer. I don't know what it is yet, and I'm okay with not knowing. But I have enough artist friends that live and work there and are from there that I know eventually I'll figure out, and they will help me figure out what I can actually contribute. And so being there as a creative is a lot different than going there on vacation. Being there as a creative and an artist and actually working and, you know, creating with other Mexican artists, and coming home and hearing the political climate about immigration and anti-immigrants and ICE, and growing up, you know, even here in Saginaw, like having this second class kind of citizen identity where it's like, well, you should be grateful to be here. Of course, right? You should, well, you guys left, you know, where you left was poor and impoverished and everything was backwards. And you hear these narratives that are just built on top of another one, on top of another one. And being in Mexico City and being around other artists and creatives and seeing all this inspirational work, like I'm aware, yes, there's poverty, there's contradictions, there's corruption. But as an artist, being around, you know, 100 other artists from Mexico, there was just something that was there for me that was different. And I think the word that I was looking for was humanity and dignity. And those two things existing naturally, right? Not having to have this fight to exist as a Mexican in Saginaw or Detroit or Grand Rapids or Kalamazoo or Muskegon or any of the cities, Flint, but being able to just exist as a human and have your humanity. And I think that coming home is something as an artist I'm struggling with, is trying to understand what is the place of what is the place of like another creative younger than me that may want to go to Mexico and reconnect, but also understanding the political dynamic of what's happening there, right? So I think that struggle is really interesting to me, and that 120 years of separation is really interesting to me. So when we talk about going home in my family, we talk about Texas, right? We don't really talk about Mexico in that way because we're already third gen, fourth gen. My grandfather was born in Mexico, but he left when he was like 3 years old. My other three were born on like border towns, right, in the Valley or McAllen or some of these other areas. So to me, the conversation of going home a lot of times is like San Antonio. Like my great grandmother is buried in a small town called La Costa, right outside of San Antonio, 30 miles out, maybe 28 miles out. So going home psychologically, I don't have the same experience as a lot of my Mexican friends in Detroit, where, you know, they're from Guanajuato, they're from Jalisco, but still being Mexican, still identifying as Chicano, Mexicano, and wanting to connect to that cultural element of art and creativity that's happening in Mexico City, and that humanity and dignity that I experienced, and that creative influence of Mexican artists from there producing at a high level, and wanting to connect with that somehow. And so that's one of the projects I'm trying to figure out. I just dropped a poem on my Instagram called La Danza, and it was just me sitting in the Zócalo and listening to the Aztec dancers and struggling with, like, what does the Zócalo mean to somebody who was raised here in Saginaw or somebody who was raised in Southwest Detroit, and all that beautiful nuance that's in between there. Because I didn't ever really feel less Mexican, but I just felt that we're just another story of what it means to be Mexican. Because to be in Mexico City is going to be very different than to being raised in Chiapas, still Mexico, or being raised in Jalisco, you're still Mexican, or being raised in LA or San Antonio. So to me, the stories I like to talk about are Detroit, Saginaw, Chicago, Cleveland, those Latino stories that often, those Mexican stories that we don't get to talk about. And I'm really versed, obviously, in Chicago. So I spent 13 years in Chicago. But that creative element of Mexican Chicano identity that doesn't get talked about a lot of times we're talking about LA, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not from LA, right? I'm from the Midwest, and I want to tell that story because that's what I know best.
Well, doesn't it seem as you get older, and this is just from my perspective as well, when we look back at our history, we look at our great grandparents, your grandparents even,
Mhm.
who came from a whole different era. Obviously, they talk about the greatest generation or whatever, but realizing the sacrifice that they actually made to come here because they wanted to give their family a better life. And you are that better life. You are that American dream that they dreamed about. And I often say this on my show because I recognize that with my parents and grandparents as well, the struggle, because, you know, you hear about their lives and what they had to go through. And sometimes it's not pretty,
Yeah.
but and other times, you know, they came to the land of opportunity. And regardless of whatever phase we're going through politically, the landscape or whatever, it's a good life here, you know. And so I look at it and I say, you know, and as you are, you know, what can you contribute? And the thing is that I realize that, yeah, I am that American dream that they had in their head so many years ago that some of them didn't even know I existed yet. But I'm the one benefiting from that, you know.
No, for sure. But I think the struggle with some of the conversation for me is right. Like I have a U.S. passport, so I have the privilege of being a U.S. citizen. Some of my neighbors don't,
Mm-hmm.
so their reality of the American dream is going to be very different. And some of my friends that I work with every day, right,
Mm-hmm.
don't have an American passport, don't have that stamp, right, and so they're still in process. And I think that's where the struggle for me is like, how do we as folks that have generationally been here, how are we still able to contribute to help people that don't have those same opportunities? And I think like in a city like Detroit, where you do have a large immigrant population and we're within 90 miles of a border, like Detroit's a border town. People don't
Mm-hmm.
think of it as a border town. So watching, you know, immigration be able to walk through my neighborhood and go buy tacos, right? But they want the food, but not the people.
Yeah.
That's a contradiction I see almost every day, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
the border's right there. They go into I literally will watch ICE walk into a grocery store that is selling Mexican products, that has Mexican food, that has tamales, that has carne asada, and literally go buy stuff, but are still in the process of deporting people. So I think for me, for sure, I think I'm very privileged to be here, but in every conversation is I think that there's still generations now struggling
Mm-hmm.
to maintain that American dream. And we say American dream, also, this is another thing that kind of messed with me a little bit, right? Again, the narrative we're taught is because our grandparents and parents did come from impoverished areas, but we've never experienced Mexico in its modernity, in its creative way. Like I was always taught everybody wants to leave Mexico. And then you go to Mexico and you see people thriving.
You
Like,
see a
wow,
whole different
they're
vibe.
like, why would I want to leave Mexico? Like, it's great
Yeah.
here. So I get it though, because there's degrees to it. If you're somebody poor, if you're a farmer, if you're somebody on the outskirts, if you've been left out of society, for sure, you're going to be like, let's go where you can hustle over here and you can work a basic medial job and still make a living for your family. But then there's this other conversation in Latin America where there's millions of people that are like, bro, it's great here. Why would I want to leave? And we don't, the thing is balance. Like, you know, we don't get the story of museums in Mexico, right? We don't get to say, we think of almost Mexico in this nostalgic history of the past. And we think of it in almost like a way of a t-shirt or like an ad we would see for tourism. But there's all this dynamic art, creativity, music, culture, and people thriving in those cities, that I think is the part that growing up forces you to think like, well, you know, we're less than because, you know, we did leave poor areas, but then you go and you're like, oh, well, they have everything that we have here. The lifestyle may even be a little bit better in certain degrees, in certain areas. So I think that's the struggle. And I think if I think about it, I'm only like really you're like, what, third gen? If you think about it, like if you just went back to Mexico and, you know, were reacclimated with family and connected, or even if I had a child there, like we're only 100 years away. It's not like it's this way distant thing. And proximity to the border, it's right there. Culturally, it's right there. Like if you go to Mexican town in Detroit, there's definitely Mexican culture from those regions. And so I think that's a struggle right now, is how do we in this new administration, How do we keep our neighbors safe? How do we keep our humanity for them? How do we help them have the opportunity that we were allowed? Because a lot of our parents technically, like, I mean, I had stories of my great grandmother when they crossed the border, they just walked across. There was no militarized border. They said you paid a nickel. That's what they tell you, pay a nickel, and you'd be able to, they take you across on a cart. And that's how you went back and forth. Up until really not too long ago, you could literally go. I had friends in Tijuana. They were like, oh, we would go to lunch in Tijuana and then we come back. Mm-hmm. So that idea of a border is really challenging, because it's like you want the labor, you want the food, you want the culture, but you don't want the people. And I think that's what I'm struggling with as a creative today in Detroit, is that idea of people. Like, that's the most important thing. Families staying together. People coming here still have the same opportunity as everyone else because they're contributing. Mm-hmm. They're contributing in all types of way. Like, Detroit wouldn't be Detroit in the same way, especially Southwest Detroit, without that immigration flow from the 90s that took up a lot of space and created a whole new identity of what it means to be Mexican or Chicano in Detroit.
Well, I think that, you know, as I hear you talk and I realize that, you know, there's obviously major growth, and to see that maybe you're struggling a little bit with the idea of what's happening in, say, Southwest Detroit. You see the ISIS or the immigrant that are being targeted and all. And I think that when you go to places like Mexico City or whatever, you see the humanity that's there. That's what's making you struggle.
No, for sure. And also coming off of Cinco de Mayo in Detroit was really challenging. Because
tell us about that, because we just came off it here in Saginaw too.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happening in Detroit in general is there is a transition in the way that the city wants to produce events, create culture. And I think there's a balance, right? In one way, Detroit was bankrupt, and I think it was looked at as a wasteland. A lot of people made jokes about it on a national level, and it was always like, you know, you could do whatever you wanted. And I think with the mayor now wanting to run for governor, the regulation that's coming down is pretty basic for most cities. But when you're in a place that was a creative enclave and now you're trying to regulate, and then you look at something like the NFL draft, or you look at something like St. Patrick's Day, and that's treated different than Cinco de Mayo, and it's clear and it's blatant. All you have to do is be a critical person to understand like what's going on, right? And so what's informing, you know, inspectors to come out the day before Cinco de Mayo to visit everyone? Why not do that 3 or 4 weeks before, right? When somebody could adjust. So we did have the parade. You know, one of my young folks' mom, Alma, is a part of the Mexican Patriotic Committee, and they did do the parade. They decided to do the parade where other cities decided not to, right? Philadelphia canceled theirs, Chicago canceled theirs, and a few others. I think the logic was because it was, I think, the 60th, and it was like such a historical marker that, you know, then there was a debate within organizations of whether it should happen or not. We did have it. The rain did play a role in people coming out, but I do know, you know, I have friends personally, we had to move our event from our neighborhood to another venue because, you know, the city came out and said that they could only have a certain amount of people. We were going to double that capacity. So we just moved to another venue, and I had friends say I didn't want to drive, right? Because I didn't want to risk it on Cinco de Mayo to get pulled over and then I'm deported. Multiple people said that. So when we do it in the neighborhood, the numbers are different because people can just walk there. They feel safer. We had to do it not far out, but like 10 minutes outside the neighborhood, but you still had to drive there. So there definitely is a climate in our city about nighttime economy, about events. And I think, you know, Detroit, if we, like, even now, some people I don't even think understand like how much culture there is in Detroit. Like, literally we can go out from Sunday to Sunday. I did it for 60 days straight. When we were trying to grow our organization, I was like, we weren't getting enough motion. I said, all right, I'm gonna go out 60 days straight. There is something to do in Detroit, art, music, and culture related every single day of the week. There is not a day that you can look. Now, you may not know about it because you're not going to necessarily be able to just Google it, but every day there's an art event, cultural event. And so the city's pushback, I think, is like their thing would be like, well, you wouldn't do that in Ferndale. You wouldn't do that in Birmingham. You wouldn't do that in Royal Oak. And that's true. But Detroit is Detroit because it's creative class, which is a lot of young creatives opening up space. Like we started our festival in the backyard and it was illegal. We did it for 3 years. Had we had to scale it through the whole process legally, we wouldn't have been able to do it. It would have been impossible. Now, once we got to a certain point, the city was like, hey, y'all got to figure this out. And we were able to, go through the city process, city council, do our insurance, all of those things. And now we're going into our 7th year. We do it in Eastern Market. It's called Backwoods and Bonfires, big music festival, more of a hip hop rap festival. But I bring that up because of the rules in the city. The regulation around Cinco de Mayo was really tight. And last year it was worse. Last year, they just came out and shut down legal venues, right? And there was a big pushback.
I remember that, yeah.
So this year, it was a little less. The rain affected it. But I think there's a fear, and I do think it's racially motivated at times because, again, we don't see that same pushback on St. Patrick's Day, which does a parade and is a big thing. And I don't mean that they shouldn't be able to do that. They should, because I want to go to that. I want to go to St. Patrick's Day and celebrate in Corktown. But I just want to be treated fairly and have the same as the NFL draft, where the NFL draft brings 750,000 people to downtown. And I'm a part of all that culture, right? I'm the global underground ambassador for Visit Detroit. So I was going to all kinds of parties that were illegal. Mm-hmm. And they're like, it's just that there's so many people. They're like, okay, you can do a party on the patio and we're just going to leave it alone. Whereas Cinco de Mayo, it was like a police force that looked like a militarized force. And so the conversation we're having with the new a few of the other candidates coming up for mayor is just asking them, what is your administration? How are they going to view art? How are you going to view creatives? Because Detroit is made up of a creative community as well. And a lot of young folks, that's why they stay. That's why they don't go to New York or Chicago or LA. And we don't experience that same brain drain that historically has happened, where people the most talented just leave. So that's what we hope, is that we have a conversation about how to keep that talent retained in the state and in Detroit and in the city.
Well, we have only 2 minutes left in the show. Believe it or not, it went that fast. I just want for you to explain, what is it that your new role as an ambassador for Visit Detroit? Yeah,
so with Visit Detroit, you can just go online and find them on Instagram. I'm their global underground ambassador. And all that really means is that I find all the pockets, all the corners, all the creative spaces, not only in Detroit, but also globally, that connect to Detroit. So I was in Manchester with the Burnley football team out there. We visited Manchester. We went out there. We were in Paris, London. But if you come to Detroit, you can always connect on my Instagram, Reyes Poetry, or We Are Culture Creators. And if you go to Visit Detroit, you'll see some of my videos and some of the other ambassadors. I'm one of 3 ambassadors. They all have different roles, but my role is specifically to expose underground culture, community culture, and things happening in Detroit and around the area if you were ever to come into the city, and connect with like what the most recent art scene is, or what the newest artists are doing, what the DJ venues that exist are there. So that's really my role with them.
And for those that aren't familiar, Visit Detroit,
it's like our tourism. It's like our Detroit tourism. They have a page on Instagram. They have YouTube. They have, I don't know if they started TikTok yet, but for sure, our on Instagram you can find Visit Detroit.
All right. Well, there you have it from Michael Reyes, Saginaw born. We had a great conversation tonight. He talked most of the way through the interview, but that's okay.
You got to interrupt me.
And no, but a good interviewer will allow the interviewee to talk, and that's what I did. So there you have it. So thank you, everybody, for being with us here tonight, and we'll see you next week here on Gente on Air. All right. So we're still here in the live stream now on Facebook and social media. So I just wanted to give you one last time to talk about anything you want to talk about, Mike, because Angie Blanco says we need more time with Reyes. Narcy, Rudy, and Cecil. I believe she's one of your aunts. She says very good speaker. We also hear from Val Blanco saying it's a great show. So you got your supporters here still in Saginaw, and tell us a little bit more. Anything that you want to tell us to wrap this up?
Yeah, I think like just here, do this for me. I think like just the Visit Detroit stuff, I think is a big step for us, because culturally in the city right now, we're basically as a creative export of culture, right? That's what we export as Detroit. That's one of the biggest exporters. It's like, whose voice does it come from? And Visit Detroit is our tourism page for the city. And I think they do a great job of having a balance of voices. And so I'm one of the voices. And you know, one of the things is I'm not just like the Latino voice, which I definitely love to be at times. But I get to cover the entire underground scene, right? And so we have Movement Weekend coming up, which is a big techno festival. And I'll be visiting spots, venues, underground spaces. And I think that's one of the roles, as being able to like be called up to do that was a huge honor for me, because it also leads to other connections. Like, you know, we're going to be talking about cannabis culture on a commercial level, for a tourism page, right? Could be taboo, but it's just the reality of Detroit, right? One of Detroit's industries is cannabis. So I did their first 101. How do you purchase cannabis in the city? What are the laws? What are the rules? So that way people are doing it the right way. I think on the level of like just culture of going to an event, how do you find an event in Detroit? How do you pull up? What's the protocol? And it's all pretty basic stuff. But if you're visiting from Berlin or Amsterdam, you may not know, right? And so I think that's one of the other roles, is to help people understand Detroit culture. Also, like this new series I'm about to do is like featuring artists from Detroit, rappers from Detroit. Like, who are the upcoming, who are the new voices, who are the more established voices. So I think that's another piece of that role, is just to spread out the love to the city. And then also, because of my nonprofit, I have a lot of relationships with other creatives that you might not find, you know, online if you search. But if you find that little pathway and that groove and where people are at, you're able to connect. And so all I hope is to help those folks also elevate their stories, their events, their activations, and really just build like a really, really good solidarity of community artists in the city.
And everybody can connect with you on Visit Detroit.
Yep.
Is there, as well as your culture creators?
Yeah, so if you just click, really honestly, if you want to find me, Reyes Poetry is the first layer. That's REYES Poetry. Then we are culture creators, all together spelled out. And then just Visit Detroit. Those three areas. If you want to learn more about kind of our Latino activations, Fiesta Vibes Detroit is another page that we run a lot of our events through. So that's just Fiesta Vibes Detroit, and that's with EJ. And I think, you know, if you just follow our work the best way, people are like, how do I get involved? How do I activate? It's just really show up, help, support. If you can't physically be there, you can always connect online with us. We're constantly doing activations, and we do like 100 events a year. So, you know, and then, you know, the NBA will be in Mexico City this year. So we'll be working with the NBA and doing some activations in Mexico City. I hope if everything works out, we're gonna do a small basketball tournament, mural. So there's always ways to connect, even if you're not, you know, in Detroit. There's always ways to connect.
Well, there you have it. So thank you for being with us and giving us this insight. Of
course,
those of us that are here in Saginaw, you know, Detroit's only like an hour and a half away,
Yeah.
but we're not there, so we don't always know. But we support and stand behind Detroit all the way. Southwest
Appreciate it.
Detroit. Yes.
Appreciate
All
it.
right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us again, and we'll see you next week. Okay. I'm Gente on Air.